Close quarters battle, Waterloo. Wanted to give my initial thoughts on a solo playthrough of this game that I just completed. And that was the attack on La Saint during Waterloo here with the French First Corps and the Anglo-Allied King's German Legion and some of the crack 95th rifles from the British Army. This is I guess I'll start here. I don't know how they've done it, but Lock and Load has put out two of the most fun and enjoyable Napoleonics games within months of each other this year, or even I think in the last couple of years. I am very impressed with the stuff that they've released. First Victories Wellington versus Napoleon was a fantastic simulation of the Napoleonic era at sort of a larger scale, and then this really zooms in down close into very specific parts of specific battles and shows you sort of at the company level what the combat looked like. And I'm really impressed with this. The game is really smooth playing for the most part. It is very it reminds me a lot. I've not played Lock and Load Tactical, but it reminds me of the type of approach that Lock and Load's tactical system or the World at War system. It's just a very easy to get into and start moving counters around and playing system. There's not a lot of special rules. It's all very comprehensible and intuitive. The core rules here are 60 something pages, but like I said in my unboxing, very wide, large typeface, lots of illustrations. It doesn't read like a 60-page manual. It's probably a lot shorter than that if you took out all of this and lowered the font size, but it's very well laid out. The rules here are excellently written. They're really referenceable. The index is really good. I really like that. It's easy to understand. There are maybe one or two minor, very small gray areas where I needed, I wish there was an additional clarification, but overall, this is a really good rule book to learn the system, and it plays really nicely. There's not too much chrome, but there's enough to simulate the Napoleonic era. So the command rules are not complicated, but they do force you into sort of pseudo-historical behavior by keeping your guys sort of adjacent to each other, with the exception of skirmishers who are able to operate independently of their commanders. The values on the counter are quite easy to understand: fire strength, melee strength, morale, movement. The whole system is based around adding your unit values with some modifiers depending on their casualties or the terrain or the target unit, and then rolling a die and adding whatever the modifier is to the die. So it's really easy to do. There's charts for all the different types. You've got a melee, you've got rifles, you've got muskets, depending on the type of weapons that the units are using. So there's a nice little bit of additional detail there that doesn't require any special rules. It's all the same rules for firing with muskets and rifles. It's just that the table is different. It walks you through the procedures and modifiers on the play aids. It reminds you, the visual language of this game is very seamless, and I'm really impressed that it's very clearly been developed in a way that makes it very playable, and I really like that. Everything is explained on the player aids for the most part. It gives you some of the notes about leader casualties and so forth. The only downside that I have found is that the leader fate is on one side, is on the musket side of the fire chart, but it is not on the rifle side. So you just have to remember. You eventually have to remember these rules if you're firing on the rifle side. More of an issue for the Anglo-Allied player because they're the ones with rifle units, but all the information is not on every player aid, but you play it, you get the muscle memory down, especially if you're playing it face to face, and it'll come to you really quickly. That's not even, it's the minorest of gripes. Speaking of the player aids, so many player aids in this game. They're very nice. Like I said, here's the one for melee, that's single-sided. Here's the one for artillery fire. Again, very similar rules for fire across the things. You're really just reading the counter differently. They've worked in the different types of shot that the artillery are able to use in combat, and it reminds you of what those are. It's all on the player aid. So there's not a lot of rules lookups that I was having to do. There's not a lot of special cases for different types of units. They've really integrated, the designer has really integrated the different unit capabilities very well into the visual language of the game, and I really appreciate that. I think it's really well done. And the other Lock and Load Napoleonic game, First Victories Wellington versus Napoleon, also had that, and I think it's just a really good sign of their development process that is true. It's very rare to see a game executing at this high a level, this tightly, or I should say, a company executing at this kind of level this tightly, back to back a lot. And so really impressed there. There's lots of player aids for if you need reminders about what morale checks do and when you have to do them, and the modifiers for those. There's, as you can see, not a lot of modifiers for morale checks. I mean, there's 8 here, 9. And once you've done it a couple times, you'll remember all of them, which is really nice. There's player aids that are basically like ripped straight from the rule book about retreating and ranged combat and all the actions that you can take as a unit. And again, more just reminder, it's a really good referenceable player aid set for the game. You can basically play it off the player aids once you've read the rule book, which is really nice. Yeah, I can't say enough good things about the play experience here. Here's, again, another one about all the different unit actions and what you can do with a unit. And eventually, you don't even need to refer to this anymore. It's all pretty simple. Moving and firing and melee are like the three main things you're going to do. And then there's some special stuff about special actions per scenario that the rules will give you. So I really, really like the presentation of the game and the way that presentation fits into the play of the game. Like I said, very, very breezy. Really good as a solo experience, actually, because the play is driven by these formation cards. And so whichever formations are in the game, you're going to make a deck of these formations. And then when you draw the card, you activate the formation. It's quite that simple. It provides some tension and unpredictability about what's going to happen on the battlefield. It's very, this is very critical to how well you're going to do with the game. And there's also really hard decisions to make with this activation system as well. So like, you may really want a formation to be able to go first to try and, take the initiative and do something. But if they don't go first, then they do have the ability to opportunity fire any approaching enemies, which will use up that unit's action when their card gets drawn, but does allow you some sort of like back and forth counterplay. And like the decision about whether you activate a unit or use them for opportunity fire, waiting for their activation is actually like a really important one. And actually in the game that I played, we saw that the King's German Legion and the Farmhouse struggled a lot with that. Like, is it better to take the opportunity shot of units moving along on the roadside, knowing that you won't be able to do it when units come around the garden hedges and stuff? And so there's just like there's a lot of really crunchy, like interesting sequencing decisions to make because of this. So it's essentially a chip pull game, but with cards, similar to like something like a Most Fearful Sacrifice or something like that. I really, really like this. It makes it really good for solo play, the unpredictability. And I think face to face, you're going to get a lot of really fun, exciting moments and really good narrative over, a formation who happens to just go first and like sees a position that they're trying to take before the enemy could get there, or they don't go in time and they get cavalry charged, and that kind of thing, or they are not able to go into square before the cavalry rush them. I really like the way the game flows. It's really fun. The cards, the other cards are the event cards for each side. Some purists would say, oh, it's a hex encounter or a tactical game. I can't believe there's cards, blah, blah, blah. I actually think the cards are kind of cool. They consistently change the battlefield dynamic. And I think when you're talking about this zoomed in of a level at the company scale, you definitely need to feel like the battlefield is not a static thing, right? You're talking, each of these units is 110 guys and 25 meters across from a hex. So like, less than a football field here. It is really important that you feel the chaos of that zoomed in of a tactical level. And I really like that the way the cards do that. All sorts of things. If you can cause fires. Like in my game, we lit the orchard on fire, and then the fire burned out at the south end, which allowed for this terrain to be easier to move through. We saw some fires start up here in the wheat field from some artillery shots, and then they burned out over the course of the game. But fire can be a very potent tool if you're able to get it started in a spot. The units in the fire have to move out, and then the fire can potentially spread. You might have a wall of fire that's blocking your line of sight that you're stuck behind. So that's just one of the aspects of this. Promoting leaders, delaying reinforcements, special cards that let you like bust down gates, cards that let a unit not take opportunity fire. Like there's just a lot of stuff in here that affects your opponent, that like every turn you're going to be drawing 5 of these. And so you're going to have a different hand every turn that's going to affect the battlefield in sort of chaotic ways. And I really, really like the feel of that. Again, it provides a lot of dynamic surprise narrative that's going to go on while you're playing. This really is better face-to-face because obviously I was playing where I could see both hands of cards, so I kind of knew what each side's capabilities were. But when you're trying to second guess whether or not, if you take opportunity fire, if they've got the fire card in their hand and they're going to start a fire where you're doing opportunity shots from, that may displace you from your defensive position. Like there's just a lot of cat and mouse happening here that I think is really interesting and really cool. It reminds me a lot, like I said, of Black Swan, of Most Fearful Sacrifice, where there's a lot of like take that gotcha cards that sort of change the dynamic of what's going on. So if you really like that system, you might really, really like this. This is obviously a much more simple game, so the rules are a lot easier to learn. And it's really, it's quite, like I said, it's quite, once you start flipping cards and taking activations, it plays quite quickly. What's interesting here is there's not discrete movement and combat phases for all your units. So you activate a formation and then you go unit by unit. And when units take a fire action or they take a combat action, they resolve all of their movement and combat all at once. So you can get these kind of like wave attacks where a unit moves in, attacks, dislodges a unit, takes ground, and then another unit moves in and fires at the guys behind him. So it's not, you don't get sort of that like larger sort of like quasi pseudo Commando Grand Tactical feel where there's like distinct phases for attacking. You've got the ability for companies to operate sort of like off kilter in terms of timing and what they're doing. And that also changes the feel of the game because you can do things, you can sequence your units similar to something like BCS where you can sequence a unit to go do something and then another unit can follow up and do something else. And that also provides a lot of fun gameplay like flexibility in terms of how you want to prosecute your strategy, which is really neat. The maps are really nice. The canvas maps are nice to play on. I played on them. The one thing is I can't really get it to lay flat, so I'm gonna have to do, I left this under a bunch of stuff over like 48 hours and it still didn't flatten out, so I might have to roll it up the other way to get it to do that. But this is an option. You don't need the canvas maps for the game. They come with perfectly serviceable, really thick cardstock maps that you can put plexi over. The canvas is a nice to have, but it's not necessary. I just didn't do it because I used them because I wanted to show them and also because I didn't want to put plexi down on this table. But the counters are really nicely made. Like the terrain counters are hexes that fit right in the hex. It's very clear what terrain is being affected here. The rubble obviously pointing to this hex side, the fire and the burnt out terrain looking really good. There's some other stuff too that wasn't in the scenario. We saw the gate here that was open and closed. The counters themselves are nicely done, very easy to understand. The number of unit symbols on them represents the number of companies in that unit. So here we have a single company and here we have 3 companies, which would be, I guess, a battalion or less or more. I'm not quite sure. Here's it's reduced to 2. And you can also split these out. So I can take this, let's say I had this, I can take this 2 company column formation and split it out into 2 companies that are then in line, which is pretty cool. I played with the optional facing rules. This is the one area of the rules that I thought needed kind of the most work. So the facing rules, I think you have to have them for this scale of game. You're talking about a single company. I can see the game playing and feeling a lot differently without facing. I think I prefer having facing rules here just because of the way that it makes the tactics much more important in terms of how you've positioned your guys, whether or not you're going to get charged by cavalry and stuff like that. The problem is that the facing, so when you have a company in a hex with facing, it has to face a hex side like this, and it can only move into its front hex. You pay less for turning. You only pay, for the duration of your move, you only pay 1 movement point to turn in any direction you want. But when you get into single companies, they have to be facing a hex vertex. But the rules don't say what happens if you move from a column. So I have 2 companies here in column facing this way, and then I split one off and I go, I split them into 2 companies. So before I split them, do I face a vertex and then start moving vertex to vertex, or do I take one and when it moves, it can only move forward and then it has to face a vertex? In terms of like how the facing changes, like how the facing between vertex and hex side is executed when you're doing this kind of maneuver. So I just kind of house ruled it and said that, like, if I'm facing this way and he wants to move out, as soon as I decide to split them into companies and one of them is gonna move, then I just face him to one of the vertexes that of the front side that he's facing. So he could either go to here, or to here based on the way he's facing. And then this guy who's left here facing this has to be faced towards one of these 2. That's how I played it, but the rules aren't quite clear on that. It is an optional rule again, so perhaps there can be some additional clarification about how that's handled. But overall, I really do like the sort of like column. Like, you want to be in column when you assault in melee. You get you're much less brittle. I learned quickly that when you're assaulting as a company, it's really easy to get your company eliminated in a hand-to-hand fight. Now, the one area of this game that I think is going to be the most controversial perhaps is the deadliness of combat. Both fire and melee combat is extremely deadly. I mean, here's my casualties pile from the scenario. You can see we've lost probably like 50% of the French units and almost 100% of the British units. Combat feels incredibly deadly. And even though you are working with like a stepped casualties level, like here, you can go light to medium and there's a heavy. Single companies on their own, if they take a medium casualties result, which can happen quite easily, they're just straight out eliminated. And so I'm not quite sure how I feel about the level of lethality of the game, especially in the fire combat. I think in the melee combat, it makes sense that like a hand-to-hand fight over 5 or 10 minutes with 100 guys on each side, like you would get a lot of casualties, and that could result in companies being eliminated. However, on the firing side, the fire combat tables are actually also really deadly. So much so that like skirmishers were blowing away single companies of line infantry with really good rolls. And it does feel, on the one hand, like it's a little bit too deadly. That the elimination of units is like really high. that more than maybe would have been historical. But on the other hand, I can see the argument being made that we're at the company scale here, and these are only 110 guys. And if you are looking at something like a medium casualties, let's say that's, medium casualties is something like 30% of the company. That's like 70 to 80, or excuse me, that's like 30 to 40 to 50, 30 to 40 guys who are rendered combat ineffective. And so that is a pretty significant portion of 100 men formation. So it's maybe a function of the scale that we're so zoomed in here that like the casualties feel really high when I'm used to playing grand tactical and operational level games where casualties are sort of like more gradual over the course of like fighting ability. But it did seem a little weird when like a cavalry charge could like wipe out an entire company of guys. And now maybe the casualties don't represent actual like fatalities. Maybe they represent the dispersal of forces and whatnot and kind of abstractly like running away. But it did feel quite deadly, and in that way definitely favors the side with the higher numbers or the better defensive positions as we saw around here. And maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. I don't know enough about the historical losses on a Napoleonic battlefield, especially when we're talking about company by company. So it may be that this is right on, but it definitely gave it more of a game feel than attempting to really simulate the exact historical loss rate. And that's one aspect of this game where I would draw a big distinction between First Victories, Wellington versus Napoleon from Lock and Load, and this game. Wellington versus Napoleon is definitely very clearly attempting to simulate Napoleonic tactical combat with the right level of detail for every aspect of the game. This is much less of a simulation in some respects, in that it is trying to be a fun, playable game that you can play in just a couple of hours and get a really fun Napoleonic story out of without getting too bogged down into lots of different procedures and like different ratings and trying to simulate multi-stage losses and stuff like that. Like you're really going to get kind of a like attack, defend, you lose units, you move, and like there's not a lot of like fluff around that. So it's a very pure experience because of that, but it also feels much more like a game. And I would say that it's definitely not beer and pretzels. It is definitely more than beer and pretzels. I mean, this is like a war game for people who play war games but maybe don't play really intense war games. It's got kind of this middle ground that I think will appeal to both audiences, but maybe not fully satisfyingly to both. I think if you're like a very casual war gamer, there's maybe more going on here than you're used to, but you can still have a lot of fun. This would be like a graduation up to like a middle level war game. And if you're an advanced war gamer, there's still a lot of fun to be had here, and it's really cool to have a game that covers just the assault on La Haye Sainte or just the assault on Hougoumont. But you're also, if you play a lot more complex games that try and simulate stuff to a higher degree, you're going to find that this is a little bit more abstract or a little bit more simple. And so, I think it's a really good game. I think it's a lot of fun. I can't wait to play it face to face. I'm really impressed with the development on it. And I think, it's got a lot of replayability. There's, I think, 12 scenarios in the box, 2 different maps. Different kind of, the scenarios are all different too. Like you've got a cavalry charge is one that's just cavalry, no infantry. You've got this assault, which is kind of like a larger scenario. Different times during the day, different units. Like you've got the night assault on La Haye Sainte starting at 6 p.m., I believe, or 8 p.m., something like that. So there's a lot of replayability here. The way the cards and the activation cards come out mean that even the same scenario is not going to play the same way. But the game depth here is probably not comparable to First Victories. This stands on its own as someone who likes like Lock and Load Tactical, who likes World at War 85, who wants like a very thematic period game that's not going to take, it's not hard to learn and not going to take them too long to play. And so if that is the vision that the designer had when they were creating this, I think they've succeeded marvelously. This is a lot of fun. There's a lot of cool stuff that can happen in this game, and you get to see combat at a level you don't normally see in other tactical games, while also being something you can complete in a couple hours, or less with some of the shorter scenarios. So highly recommend that you give Close Quarters Battle Waterloo a try, a look. It should be coming out in North America from Lock and Load pretty soon. They've told me imminently, and I'm thankful to them that they provided me a copy, and I was able to get a look at it. It caught my eye, like I said, at some conventions, and I'm happy to say that it delivers a really fun Napoleonic experience without getting too deep into grognard territory.